Hi everybody, thanks for joining. We're just waiting just another minute, just as a few more attendees get on the line. All right, thanks for joining us today, everybody. Today we're here to talk to you about the mitigation of cybersecurity risks facing small to medium businesses. Joining me is Ben from Sophos, who is a global solutions engineer specialising in the threat landscape. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you for having me.
Now, just a few bit of housekeeping on the webinar. If you've got any questions to ask, you can hit the Q&A button down the bottom anytime in the webinar, drop a question in there. Towards the end of the webinar, we will have some responses to those questions that you put in there for you. So we'll get started. So today's changing threat landscape has increased, and this makes it difficult for small businesses to keep up. Today's threats are more stealthy and complex than ever. And cyber criminals only need to find a single weakness to exploit. We'll use any means necessary to find vulnerabilities. So what is the ASD Essential 8? The ASD 8 is published by the Australian Signals Directorate, abbreviated to ASD, hence the ASD and ASD 8. The ASD 8 is a prioritised list of mitigation strategies to assist organisations in protecting their systems against a range of cyber threats. And the mitigation strategies can be customised based on each organisation's risk profile and the cyber threats they're most concerned about. While no single mitigation strategy from the list is guaranteed to prevent cybersecurity incidents, organisations are recommended to implement 8 essential mitigation strategies as a baseline. Now, this baseline, which is known as the Essential 8, makes it harder for adversaries to compromise systems. Furthermore, implementing the Essential 8 proactively can be more cost-effective in terms of time, money, and effort than having to respond to a successful, large-scale cybersecurity incident. So what is the Australian Signals Directorate, and why does their opinion matter, you might ask? So bear with me a little, as the way they describe it in their own words is a bit of a mouthful. So this ASD defends Australia from global threats and advances our national interests through the provision of foreign signals intelligence, cybersecurity, and offensive cyber operations as directed by the Australian government. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre is the Australian government's lead on national cybersecurity. Brings together the cyber security capabilities from across the Australian government to improve the cyber resilience of the Australian community and support the economic and social prosperity of Australia in the digital age. The ACSC drives cyber resilience across the whole of the economy, including critical infrastructure, systems of national interests, federal, state, local governments, small and medium businesses, academia, and the not-for-profit sector in the Australian community. Pretty full on, right? So let's just simplify that too. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre provides research and advice to all Australians in improving their cyber resilience. So if you asked the Australian government about cybersecurity, essentially the answer would come from the Australian Signals Directorate. So what are the 8 mitigation strategies? Now the 8 are separated into groups which identify their purpose. And there's a suggested implementation order for each of the 8 cyber threats to assist organisations building a strong cyber security posture for their systems. The 8 aims to prevent malware delivery and execution with application patching, application whitelisting, restrictions around Office macro settings, and user application hardening. The 8 also aims to limit the extent of cybersecurity incidents and aid in data recovery through the control of administrative positions, patching of operating systems, multi-factor authentication, and daily backups. As mentioned earlier, no one strategy is the answer for a business, nor is every business going to have the same outcome from implementing each strategy. So each should be implemented, in line with how the business operates. So looking at the business essentially before technology. Once organisations have implemented the desired mitigation strategies to an initial level, They should focus on increasing the maturity of the implementation such that they eventually reach full alignment with each of the 8 recommended mitigation strategies. So let's discuss each of these in a bit more detail. First off the rank, application whitelisting. One of the best ways to actually prevent malware compromising your systems in the first place is application whitelisting, which involves making a list of approved and trusted programs to prevent any unauthorized access to your system. This ensures all non-approved applications and programs are prevented from executing, which includes preventing potentially malicious programs from executing. Application whitelisting should be approached in both business policy and from an IT systems perspective. That is, businesses should create policies which employees in your business are required to acknowledge, specifying which sorts of applications are acceptable to use on your business's networks. Businesses should also deploy security systems which enforce application whitelists and only allow approved applications to run in the event that staff are not adhering to the business's policies. Now, this image here shows the administrative console for Sophos Central's Endpoint Advanced, which is preferred security vendor used by Powernet. Here we see the application control features of the endpoint configured to allow only the latest versions of the Microsoft Office suite to run on that endpoint. With this, in short, application whitelisting is simple, yet it's very effective. Now, businesses need to acknowledge that staff workstations are tools a business provides to their employees to complete their work functions. However, at the same time, we cannot ignore that there is a surge in IT adoption in businesses, including cloud-hosted services, and especially in the younger generations. So a balance of control versus freedom needs to be worked through so staff are not held back by their business's IT systems. Ben, what sort of adoption rates have you seen for application control like this in small businesses?
So within Australia and New Zealand, for that matter, adoption rates at the moment are actually quite low because there is a fear of administration. And when we talk to a lot of IT teams, the whole idea of locking down workstations is a risk to upset employees, but also what's the administration overhead? What will it mean if, every time a new application is introduced to a business, if they need to contact their IT provider or their IT team to then allow it? So far we've seen a pretty low adoption, but it is certainly on the rise.
Great, and while we have applications like Office, which are common, what does a business do where its business as usual application is a bit more obscure or customized? Can they still deploy application control?
Yeah, absolutely. So you need to start looking at more advanced features, but Microsoft itself has got like App Locker, for example, which provides application whitelisting. So the Sophos solution, say, provides a very easy means for standard applications, but once it starts to get a little bit more obscure, if you look at, say, something like Microsoft App Locker, that will then give you the ability to whitelist.
You'll see a common theme through our discussions today about the ASD8, and that is the requirement to look at a business's needs and functions first, and then work through applying the right security strategies in the right way in order to suit that business. Powernet can run scans over a business network and identify a list of business applications currently in use, and from this, quickly build a suggested application whitelist to be implemented across a business. That way, anything new to the environment is controlled until it is approved and reviewed. Now on to number 2, application patching. Now, just because your system is free for bugs and malware now does not mean it will stay that way forever. Adversaries often use known bugs in third-party applications in order to compromise systems. To ensure your system stays protected, businesses should keep all applications updated to the latest version and download any security patches as soon as they can once they're released. Businesses should also set up their systems to notify you of pending software updates. Doing this ensures security vulnerabilities, bugs are fixed and addressed before it can escalate further, possibly allowing malicious exploitation of a known bug. Ben, how often do we see hackers going after the third-party add-ons like these as opposed to the mainstream applications like Office or Internet Explorer?
Yeah, all the time is the answer to that. So, application exploitation is one of the easiest ways to break into an organization. More so, there's a type of vulnerability or exploitation technique that provides what's called remote code execution. So essentially what that means is we're seeing, say, bad guys embed malicious code into a website. So when you say fall for a fish, you don't even need to do anything wrong but go to that website. It will then say scan and say, okay, well, do you have, say, a strange Chrome add-in or a strange Internet Explorer add-in? Does it have a vulnerability? And can we automatically deliver malware to that system? So having out-of-date software or even some unsanctioned software that has got any vulnerabilities in it is naturally going to introduce quite a big attack surface to that organization. So we see that happen all the time.
In here, in the image here, sorry, is Java, which is probably one of the most annoying third-party applications that exist and one of the most exploited. Powernet recommends deploying application patching systems to aid businesses in keeping on top of continual patching applications for patching of applications such as this one. Now, number 3, Microsoft Office macros. Microsoft Office is used by approximately 84% of businesses, and because it is used almost every day, it can be prone to misuse and can be exposed to vulnerabilities. Now, you may not know what a macro is. So in the world of IT, it is essentially a mapped sequence of computer instructions. These instructions can be used to call or execute other pieces of computer code or instructions. Along these lines, you should configure Microsoft Office macro settings to block macros from the internet, which is a common way that malicious code is delivered online and executed. One of the most common attack vectors today is email, and one of the most frequent intrusion attempts Powernet comes across are Microsoft Word and Excel documents containing macros with embedded malicious code. The image here shows a typical poorly crafted ruse. Unfortunately, it's common for non-IT savvy staff to fall for these sorts of deceptions. You should only be using vetted macros from either sources that you explicitly trust or that only have limited access to write information to your hard drive. Likewise, only use macros that have been digitally signed with a trusted certificate. Ben, is there any other risks or attack vectors associated with Microsoft Office?
Yeah, so Microsoft Office is, again, because it's so widely adopted, it was at 84%, it's always targeted and people are always trying to find some new vulnerabilities. So even with macros disabled, earlier this year or late last year, we saw what was called a DDE attack, which essentially you didn't even need to do anything wrong. But having malicious code just embedded in the document, you were able to then get it to execute. So one of the other mitigations that is worth employing is looking at deploying Office readers on your system as well. So instead of, say, opening documents directly within Microsoft Word, you open it in Microsoft Word Viewer. That way code doesn't have the ability to run. And then once you vet it and say, yes, this is a trusted document, you can then open it in Microsoft Office to then edit further.
Moving on to number 4 now, application hardening, not to be confused with application white or blacklisting. Now, application or system hardening eliminates risk. In order to do this, we remove all non-essential programs and utilities or features and keep only the ones you actually need. This is of particular importance with configuring web browsers to block elements like Flash ads and even Java on your systems. But as mentioned earlier, we need to be careful here, ensuring we place restrictions only if they are not essential to business functions. While some tools and utility programs are undoubtedly useful, they are also very common ways that hackers use to deliver and execute malicious code on compromised systems. So while we're at it, you should go through all of your commonly used applications, including PDF viewers, web browsers, yes, Office as well, and disable any features that you do not explicitly need for the same reasons. Ben, what are your thoughts on attackers using one or all 3 of what we've just discussed in third-party applications, macros, program add-ons, and exploits?
Yeah, well, we see it commonly, and it's called chain-in. So essentially, you will have multiple vulnerabilities that you're aware of. You'll try and get what's called a stager onto that system. So say you'll phish a user and have it open a Word document. That stager will then try and scan the system or pull down a secondary payload or another piece of malware, which will then chain a bunch of these exploits together to try and gain some kind of persistence. So it's something that we see all the time. And naturally, you want to try and reduce that attack surface. So if you say don't have any Java applications inside of your environment, there is no reason to have Java anymore. Most applications don't need it. But the other way you can look at this mitigation is to say, well, I still have Java applications in my environment, or I still have something that requires Flash in my environment. So then just allow the users that need it to run it. So don't deploy it to everybody. Just say, okay, well, we know that Anthony in accounts or Sally in accounts needs Flash for their job. So just deploy Flash to that computer and don't allow everyone else to have it. Try and mitigate that attack surface as much as possible.
Yeah, definitely. So reduce attack surface so there's fewer areas and things for adversaries to exploit. And moving on to number 5, administrative privileges. So as many of you may be aware, every system has and needs an administrator account. Now, this is used to allow systems to be configured, have software installed, and so on. You want to take steps to reduce the damage of cybersecurity events if and when they do occur. Because generally, they're going to occur at some stage in the majority of businesses. It's really how far it moves in your organization, which is what you've got to have to control. You should always restrict administrative privileges on your systems wherever possible, as an admin accounts that are exposed are major targets for hackers. There is a significant difference in the amount of harm a hacker can do on a system with restricted privileges versus being handed the so-called keys to the kingdom by full administrative privileges. Then just how easy are we making things if we give a hacker a privileged account on an IT system?
You're essentially giving away the system. So if we talk about an active attacker on a system, so when we break into a system, or when an attacker breaks into a system, I should say, there's multiple stages. You get your initial connection, and then you need to go through a tricky process called privilege escalation to try and become administrator, and then laterally move around the network freely after you've privilege escalated. But on the flip side as well, if we look at just malware, we've seen malware time and time again that actually scans the system to say, okay, well, who am I running as? Do I have administration privileges? And if it doesn't have administration privileges, it will literally stop running to say, well, I can't have any effect on this system. Let's just cancel my attack altogether because there's nothing effective that I can do. So just by turning off privileged accounts for those that don't need it, you're instantly reducing your attack surface for malware, but you're also making an attacker or a hacker's life a lot harder as well.
So businesses should then reevaluate who has administrative privileges and why they have them on a regular basis, giving and revoking those privileges as needed. And whatever you do, never use these types of powerful accounts for something that could potentially lead to a compromise like web browsing or reading email or just general daily business as usual tasks.
The other thing to add there, Tom, is your sysadmins. If you have an internal IT team, they shouldn't be working every day with a privileged account as well. They should have their standard account that they receive email on and work day to day. And then they should have a privileged account that they then use to say, log in to install software and fix systems and that kind of thing.
So now on to operating system patching. Now this is fairly simple. Always patch your operating systems whenever updates are released, and never, under any circumstances, should you still be using unsupported operating system versions like Microsoft Windows XP. When operating systems stop being supported, this means vulnerabilities will no longer be fixed with updates, even if they're discovered. As security vulnerabilities are another common way that systems become compromised, it stands to reason you should always update as soon as possible. Windows version 8.1 and Windows 7 are both now outside of mainstream support. Now this means that all general support for both operating systems has ceased. Both versions are in extended support, which means Microsoft will only release bug fixes and patches to the operating systems, and will no longer provide feature or general support for the operating systems. Once extended support finishes for both, no more security patches or bugs fixes will be provided for either.
The other thing to note there as well, Tom, is server operating systems. Time and time again, I talk to organizations that might still have, say, Server 2003, for example. And the answer to why they still run it is essentially it's too hard to move away. But by having, say, something like Server 2003 sitting there with a web server running on it, you're introducing a huge amount of risk into that organization. So it's just as important to keep your servers up to date and as cutting edge as possible.
Absolutely. So security vulnerabilities effectively in operating systems can be used to further compromise systems. Then what are some of the major security vulnerabilities Sophos has seen in the past 12 months, for example, that have been fixed with a simple OS patching update?
Well, the WannaCry virus is one of the best ones to point out. So if for those of you that aren't aware of WannaCry, it made the news last year. Essentially, it was a ransomware strain that attacked the National Health Service, or it managed to attack the UK's National Health Service. That used a known vulnerability within Microsoft Windows named Eternal Blue. Now, there's a patch available for that. But today we still see viruses like WannaCry and WannaCry itself worming across the internet because people are still failing to patch their systems. And it's something that's so easy to do. It's something that everyone knows they need to do. There's no reason why you shouldn't have patched and close that vulnerability off.
Yeah, completely agree. Now, this image shows a familiar pop-up in the latest version of the Windows operating system. We too often see staff continually clicking "Remind me later," persistently delaying the installation of critical operating system updates and patching. Now, because of this, Powernet recommends deploying operating system patching systems to aid businesses in keeping on top of continual OS patching. Patching control systems can enforce the installation of critical updates, or where updates are repeatedly failing to be deployed, generate alerts to advise our support staff that the machine has been left vulnerable. Now, the final two in the 8 are what I consider the most important of all. Firstly, multi-factor authentication. Now, multi-factor authentication works by adding a second factor to the login process. Upon logging into your system, your usual password and username combination is used, but then a second logon code is requested to complete the process. Now, this second logon code is commonly secured to a single physical device, which is usually carried by the authorized person for that system and logon. So without both the username and password combination, plus that secondary logon code, access to your systems is denied. So when Sally from the procurement team sets her password to Sally01, John Q. Hacker, who just guessed that very simple password, still cannot gain access to the system where Sally can procure stock with her supplier accounts without that second factor code, which is only available on Sally's mobile phone. Ben, how prevalent are brute force attacks or exploited password recovery mechanisms these days? And would you say this could be one of the most successful methods of gaining access to systems?
It is 100% the most successful method of gaining access to systems. But the thing is as well, we're not just seeing brute force attacks. From all these data breaches that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, these passwords are appearing online. So for example, one of my favorite password dumps to use if I'm attacking a system is a LinkedIn data breach. A lot of people use the same password for LinkedIn as they do a business account. So just by logging on to the darknet and downloading these password dumps, you're essentially getting the password and saying, okay, well, the password might be autumn 2018. We know that we're suddenly in summer 2018. The chances are that's going to be the next password used, or they're still using that same password that's their dog or their maiden name. The other thing too, though, is we're not just seeing password attacks against, say, business accounts. We're also seeing it against things like banking. So for example, I was working with a mechanics, a 3-user organization in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, and they had no multi-factor authentication turned on for their business ANZ account. The attacker logged in using reused credentials. They then went and updated the payee details within ANZ's website. That way, when the supplier went to get paid for the parts delivered to the mechanics, there was actually then transferred funds, about $25,000 worth of funds, into the attacker's bank account. So we're not just seeing, say, business email compromise, we're also seeing banking targeting. This is why you need things like multi-factor authentication.
So multi-factor authentication is easily one of the most effective protection mechanisms available. And these days, available to about 90% of platforms. However, astonishingly, we still see huge services like Google, for example, only having about a 10% coverage of multi-factor authentication. There's an immediate and obvious reason people don't deploy multi-factor authentication. It's intrusive and it's annoying, but isn't that exactly the point? The system is intended to get in the way of the login process, including getting in the way of anyone with malicious intentions. So while it may be an inconvenience that Sally can't access some of the systems on the day she leaves her phone at home and can't get the multi-factor authentication code, this is still better than compromising the entire system. It should enable multi-factor authentication on all systems that support it, including but not limited to VPNs and remote desktops, SSH, SaaS platforms, cloud platforms, websites, and any other remote access techniques or systems your business has. Stronger authentication will always make it harder for someone trying to gain access to the sensitive information you're trying to protect.
One final thought on that as well is quite often C-level executives or general managers and similar don't want that inconvenience. And the first reaction is turn it off for my account. They're actually more likely to be targeted than someone else in the organization. So they should be the ones that have got multi-factor authentication turned on, more so than, say, someone that works in accounts or someone that's, say, working at a POS machine or similar.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, finally, at number 8 in the list is backups. Backups are undoubtedly the last line of defense, and all businesses need to ensure they have the right backups set up for their business, which are set up in the right way as well. Now, doing so will make sure that you can always access your information immediately following a cybersecurity incident, which will go a long way towards making sure you get back on your feet as quickly as possible. It is often we come across companies who feel are adequately covered by backups, and while they may have a secondary copy of data, they fail to look at the amount of time it takes to get that data back onto their production systems in order to get their staff working again. So in implementing backups, don't forget to take into consideration business continuity, not just a second copy of your data. Always make daily backups of all important data, including both new and your changed data. Go out of your way to test these backups regularly and retain them for at least 3 months or longer if your industry requires this. Backups need to be set up in a way that they are detached from your primary systems. So if the systems themselves do become compromised, your backups are not able to be accessed by the hacker that's then got into your systems. Now, backups also extend to cloud and SaaS platforms. There is a common misconception around the big SaaS or cloud providers being Office 365 and G Suite. Now, just because your data is in one of these cloud systems, don't assume that it's backed up and safe from a cyber incident. This year, we've seen ransomware variants and they've gained a name Ransom Cloud as such that they encrypt your data in the cloud via the usual methods of gaining access to your mailbox, with a phishing email or something similar to this. Now, to better understand Office 365 and G Suite backups, both SaaS providers have lines in their product descriptions pertaining to the fact that they do not have backups as such. Now, both providers have a maximum retention period for data. Office 365 will retain deleted email for 30 days, G Suite for 25 days. But both products specifically state on their websites that point-in-time recovery is out of scope of 365 Exchange Online service, for example. And for G Suite, after 25 days, the data is gone forever and cannot be recovered. Office 365's upper enterprise plans provide options for legal hold and litigation hold, which effectively makes the emails undeletable while the service is active, that is. However, this doesn't extend to changes or versions of the data. So while you can't hard delete one of your emails with your legal hold enabled, there still leaves a question mark about malicious changes to the emails that are in place. So furthermore to that, if for some reason an Office 365 administrator, for example, disables that litigation hold in 365, all of that retained data is immediately removed and lost forever. All right, so wrapping it up in summary, as we've discussed, the ASD8 is a device provided by the Australian government to help keep your business safe and combat some of today's threats. Now, it's an advisory from the the Australian Signals Directorate. It's not mandatory, and not all of the 8 will necessarily fit all businesses and work and have the same outcomes in each business. But there is one thing to definitely discuss, which is that the ASD8 isn't everything in the picture when it comes to cybersecurity. So Ben, what are some of the key protection items that are not really included in the ASD8?
There's a number of things. From a technology perspective, we can talk about endpoint protection or antivirus, as well as your firewalls and visualization as well. Like, one thing that a lot of businesses nowadays are after is visualization. How do they actually understand what's going on? But on top of that as well, we should talk about security as a culture, and we could talk about this for hours, so I'll try and keep it short. But it's about educating everybody that security is a business problem. It's not an IT problem. You can do a lot around IT to help secure a business, but at the end of the day, if your organization isn't on board, it makes protecting your organization much harder. And there is a term called the human firewall. And I'm not a huge fan of that term, but if we talk about that for a moment, it's about educating your users. So talk to them about why security is important. Let your users understand the cost of a breach. Don't keep this information, say, to yourself. But also train your users. So one of the things that's become very popular in the last couple of years has been phishing simulation. So one of the easiest ways for an attacker to break in is phishing users, because it gets past all the technology. You get past if you get past the email filtering and you get through the firewall, and it gets to the point where that user is opening the email, the attacker's already got some kind of access into the organization. So by training your users to say, hey, this is how you spot a phish, but this is a risk if you fail a phish as well, and start to apply some user controls and education around security, you're just going to protect your whole business going forward. So we need to start driving security as a culture inside of organizations.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And for anyone who might not be aware, can you explain exactly what a phish is? Is that a thing you catch out of the river or what?
So phishing started off, we've probably all received, those performance enhancing blue pill emails before, or the Nigerian prince, please send monies kind of emails. But what we're seeing phishing being is, say someone sending an email to an organization to say, hey, here's a shipping notice. Can you just open this attachment and enable, say, macros, of which then that Word document that you've enabled macros in will then pull down some malware from the internet and infect your system. So really, phishing, it's not just via email, I should say. It can come in via phone. I've never seen it via snail mail before, or traditional mail, but it's really just the art of managing to get a user to open something that you want them to open that's generally laced with something like malware.
Great, no worries. So I suppose as a general recommendation across the ASD8 and security in general, we need to just make sure that you talk to the right people about implementing the right systems that work in with your business. Not every approach is the same for every business, and many staff can work in different ways, and sometimes there's different approaches for different teams in your business as well. So reach out to us and we can help work through that process there. Now, if you've got any Q&A, there's a Q&A box down the bottom of the webinar window there. If there's any questions you'd like to ask us now to answer, feel free to put those in there. We'll just give it a minute or so to allow that to go through. All right, so we don't have any questions coming through. So feel free to reach out to myself. My email should be on the screen. If you want us to come out, or I can arrange for Sophos to come and talk to you as well about any of the stuff we've discussed today. If you've got any other general questions about your systems or cybersecurity in your business, or if you're concerned there might be risks or areas where your business is exposed, we can come work through that with you. Thanks for joining us today. And Ben, thanks for coming in.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.